Recently, there was an article in the Financial Times, and the Financial Times was talking all about the epic, historic bull market, investor psychology, and risks and potential sell-offs. They were making the argument that actually we've only lived in a bull market and that there is tons and tons of risk that assets could turn over very quickly. There was a number of investors that also started to tweet and be like, look, all the young people, they've never lived during a market downturn. They continued to say that they don't understand how to underwrite risk. They don't understand how to weather that asset sell-off. They were all pointing to last Friday as that sell-off that made them think about it. So I went and I did some analysis. And what I did is I looked at people who were graduating in 2009. If you graduated college in 2009, you're approximately 35 years old today. Now, if you look at that group of folks, what you find is that they have actually, in my opinion, lived through more financial duress than any other generation in history. What do I mean? Well, if you graduated in 2009, you walked into one of the worst job markets in history. Literally, there was people losing their jobs left and right. No one was hiring. A lot of those folks had to move in with their parents. On top of that, you saw family and friends all losing their jobs, getting completely wiped out financially. There was mass chaos. It is not called the Great Financial Crisis for any reason. Now, 2009 was not the only thing. It took until March of 2010 for people to actually start to get private job growth. So for an entire year, people who were graduating in 2009 were sitting on the sidelines, could not find jobs. It was very, very difficult. You can see here that it wasn't until 2010 when people actually started hiring again. Now, that would be bad enough if you started your career during a global financial crisis. But then, of course, if you think of last year, March of 2020, asset prices were selling off due to the COVID concerns, the uncertainty, the fear, the doubt that was in the market. We saw gold go down over 10%. We saw stocks go down 25 to 35%. And we saw Bitcoin go down 50% in a single day. It was a recession. There was 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. So quite literally, people who graduated in 2009 have lived through 2 separate recessions in a 12-year period. On top of that, last year, there was over 6.5 million people a week that were losing their jobs. Unemployment reached almost 15%. We watched people have to run businesses or live and work at businesses that could not operate. This was the hardest business environment in the last 50 years. The government forced you to go home and run your company while you sat at home, locked away, without your freedom to go to your place of business and operate as you had been. So not only did those people live through the global financial crisis, not only did they live through the 2020 recession and the lockdowns, but on top of that, most young people have actually invested in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And if you look at that, since 2011, there have been 3 times over 80% drawdowns in the price of Bitcoin. Since graduation, people who are about 35 years old have lived through 3 separate 80+% drawdowns. But let's give people the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that most people were not invested in the market until 2016 or 2017. If you were invested in 2017, in 2018, a year later, you lived through an 80+% drawdown in the price of Bitcoin. Other assets outside of Bitcoin in the crypto market drew down 95 to 99%. There has never been a time in the entire stock market that stock investors or boomers or people in older generations have had to live through an 85 to 99% drawdown in assets. It's the single largest, most severe bear market that anyone in the legacy market would have ever faced. But it's not just about that 2018 bear market. Let's say that you weren't even invested then, and you just invested at the beginning of 2021. If you're a young person and you invested at the beginning of 2021, there have been 6 separate times this year, just in 2021, that you have weathered a 20+% drawdown in the price of Bitcoin, including a 37% drawdown in September and more than 50% drawdown in May to July. So the whole idea that young investors haven't lived through bear markets, they don't know what a market downturn looks like, is completely wrong. In fact, the truth is that the young investors, they have diamond hands. 87% of people who owned Bitcoin when it was $17,000 in 2017 held it all the way down to $3,000. They were buying more. Young investors are built different. They're digital native. They understand volatility. Most of them have a high degree of their net worth tied up in assets like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies that have 80 volatility. They were built for this environment. The older generations, the legacy investors, the stock market investors, they can't handle this volatility. Young people were built for it. They were built in it, and they are best prepared to continue to invest in this asset. So not only have young people lived through multiple bear markets and multiple market downturns in the last 12 years, But on top of that, they are used to much more volatility. They are used to much bigger drawdowns. There's not a single investor in the stock market that wouldn't run and cry to the government and ask for a bailout, ask for monetary or fiscal stimulus if the stock market went down 54% over 3 months. If it went down 6 times in a year over 20%, they literally would be crying foul. They'd be asking for more circuit breakers. They would be saying something is broken in the market. They'd be asking for the Federal Reserve chairman to be fired. They can't handle the volatility that young people can. Young people understand the world has changed. But older people will continue to point at the young people and say they don't know what they're doing. They're completely confused.